All right, I think you're unmuted, Jules. You can go ahead.
Okay. Love the Dopey Nation. So happy to share. Um, my first drug experience would have been in the US after I live in the UK and lived there since I was 9. But I'd go to America on trips, and I went to a trip to go to a summer camp, and there's a friend of mine a year older was at the summer camp, and I must have been about 13. And on one of my last days before returning back to England, he said, "Oh, we got to try some weed." So I smoked it, and it was one of those things. It didn't do anything. I felt absolutely nothing, and I now know from sort of drug folklore that that can happen with weed. The first time you try it, you maybe don't feel anything. So that happened to me. But then later on, I I sort of all the music people that I liked were taking drugs and stuff, all the bands and everything. So I kind of researched them all before doing them in a way. I researched all the drugs, and I got into I was in a group of sort of hippie kids, and started smoking weed and stuff. And we would hang out around the King's Road in London, which is sort of swinging 60s area. And a lot of the parents that lived around there were, tour managers for the Grateful Dead or the sort of older rock and rollers and stuff like that. And so we were the sort of this would have been I was born in 1960, so this would have been, um, 73 or 74. And in the UK, um, for drinking, the drinking age is lower than the US. It's 18. And so, which meant that with certain pubs, if they had a side door that went into their sort of pool hall area, because pubs had pool tables, kids could just all sneak in there past the bartender. No one could see you, and they were almost like youth clubs, So you'd have these back rooms of pubs with pool tables filled with 16-year-olds, um, all drinking booze and stuff. So we would drink in a pub, and we'd start drinking beer at about 16 and stuff. And on the King's Road, um, that was we were in the sort of junior pub, and up the road were the older brothers, and that's where uh, there'd be a pub there called the Roebuck, where the Sex Pistols used to drink, and other rockers. And it was not uncommon for us to visit that pub with the older brothers that would go to it. And as you were walking upstairs, someone would be literally falling down the stairs as you were walking up there, because they'd be off their head on drugs and stuff. And so you'd have to dive out of the body falling down the stairs. And then we'd get thrown out of the pub by the older brothers. They didn't want us there. But on that scene, there was a bit of acid and Quaaludes. So I'm lucky enough, you could say, to have caught the last of the golden era of Quaaludes, which can be as featured in The Wolf of Wall Street, hilariously. Um, and so those were kind of a lot of fun. You'd have one of them, one Quaalude tablet, and some beer, and you just felt like Mick Jagger. You could you'd you give you the confidence to go and chat to any girl, or they're hilarious. It just gave you so much bravado and confidence and stuff and swagger. and but some of the kids in that scene they were addicted, and they got kind of hooked on them, and they'd wake up and you'd hear stories about them beating their mother up, and so that wasn't so cool. And all the older brothers in that scene got into heroin and stuff, and a lot of them died. So we were slightly, I don't know, perhaps a bit wiser or something. We could see that the older generation were fucking up on heroin. The sort of older hippies were fucking up on heroin, so we kind of stayed away from it. But then what we'd do is we'd also do speed, and speed wasn't meth back then. I don't know what it was chemically, but it was called bathtub speed, or I suppose you'd call it. It was a powder, and you'd snort it, and punk rockers liked it, and I quite liked it. And then there was also these tablets called French Blues, which were a sort of a hangover from the mod days, sort of mods and rockers, which sort of predated punk. And you'd take like 6 of these blue pills, which were illegally made, homemade stuff, and it's a horrible buzz. But so I started to get into bands because I wanted to be a rock star. So I played guitar, and so in one of the bands, it was a sort of punk band I was in, and we supported the Pretenders, and we supported Adam and the Ants, and we were like we weren't very good. We were like a C level punk band. We weren't an A level sort of punk band or so forth. But with the speed, it got to this point where we all agreed that we wouldn't do speed before a gig. So I think me and the drummer decided to break that rule, and I had quite a big gig. And on the first chord, when I hit my guitar, I broke 3 strings. And that takes some doing. Breaking 3 strings when you play guitar, you have to be some sort of caveman asshole to do that. And so that was a real pain in the ass. And showed you just what shit that speed was. But so then I thought I'd try and sell it, to friends and stuff. Sell the powdered stuff, not the French blues pills, to people, and that wasn't really a success. So I'd go and I didn't go to college. I dropped out of school at high school to be a rock star and live in squatted houses in London. But yeah, so my speed dealership wasn't very a big success. But what I did like was going out night clubbing. So I enjoyed that nightlife. Really liked it. A lot of people would stay at home and smoke a joint. I'd like to get out in the nightlife. So I lived in a squatted house, which is a lot of fun. No rent, and everyone did their own room up the way they liked it, and we're all doing sort of speed and weed and stuff. And um, there was also a pub down the road that would leave giant kegs of high pressurized beer just out in the sort of in their backyard and stuff like that. So every now and then we'd steal one of them, and we'd have a room in the squat, which would be a bunch of passed out people, literally dribbling passed out in the keg, and you just walk over them and help yourself for a drink, and then take it back to your room. So that was kind of cool. And also at that squat was this guy who's a bit like a Nick Cave type of dark, sort of early, I suppose, bit gothic type character, and he was a heroin junkie, and he's a sort of friend of mine. But I remember being in his part of the squat was like a warehouse room, and it was very well, he had it very stylishly decorated and everything. And I remember hearing some shouting above, and I said, "What the fuck's that?" He said, "Oh, it's Ray, the fucking junkie upstairs, and he's having a fight with his, you know, partner or whatever." And suddenly there was this sort of liquid that was started to flow down the walls in his really super stylish warehouse apartment, and and it sort of seemed to be raining in his apartment. And I said, "What the fuck's that?" And what it was that Ray the junkie was too lazy to make it to the toilet. What he'd do is he'd pee into bottles and leave it in his loft. And basically, his entire loft was bottles full of urine, with a thin path for him to get from his front door to his little shitty mattress that he'd sleep on. And during this fight, he'd knocked over these bottles, and this was raining down in my friend's stylish apartment. And I was like, he was screaming and freaking out, obviously. And I was like, "Go, see you later, dude. Bye." So left him to clean up. But that was kind of a mad squat. The squat burnt down, but which was kind of like, who cares in a way. But then I was back at my parents or whatever, and so that was a bit boring. Um, so I got a job at a concert venue, and it was a nightclub that Richard Branson, the guy that owns Virgin Records and Virgin Airlines, he wanted to have an American style club in London. He'd seen them in America, and he wanted to build one that had a really great sound system, and it was waitress service, and it had cool bands playing at it and everything. And so I got a job as a barman, and it was great working there because instead of having to deal with customers, all I had to do was deal with six pretty cocktail waitresses, because the bouncers would tell the customers to fuck off away from the bar, sit down and get served by a waitress. So that was fun. The the bouncers, that the security there, all looked like ex-bank robbers, and they might have been. And they ran the drug concessions. So basically, everyone's wages at the end of the week kind of went back to them for all the coke that they'd had from the security team. So so that was a trip and a way to, um, people working there in the end started to rip off a lot of money, and a lot of people that worked there became really bad junkies because they were just had access to cash that they were just stealing hand over fist from the venue. Um, but that was kind of fun working there for a while. Um, then I worked at a restaurant, and as a chef. And on my first day of training, this guy who had the piss raining down in his apartment, he was working there, and he said, "Oh, this is really easy. You'll get it, just after one night." So on the first night, I had something like 8 beers, 2 lines of coke, and about 4 joints. And at the end of the evening, he says, "Yep, you've got it." And so I got the job in this restaurant. And at the restaurant, which had a sort of downstairs kitchen area, there was a guy, I forget who he's a friend of originally, but I was introduced to this Coke dealer, and he was very sort of charismatic and cool. Covent Garden area in London had just converted from being a big old-fashioned marketplace where vegetables and stuff was sold, and then turned into this really trendy go out area. And he was a Coke dealer, and he'd swoop into the restaurant and say, and because he was a friend, I was, my friend said, oh, Joe's cool, if he wants to go downstairs, go ahead, let him, hang out in the sort of, kitchen areas and stuff like that. And in the kitchen areas, I saw him bring out a sort of, I don't know, quarter ounce of Coke, and then he'd bring out some other powder from another pocket. He'd mix this up, and basically he was taking the Coke that he bought and chopping it up and cutting it to, double its size. And then he'd be running around selling it in this trendy new district of of, of London. And he knew he knew actors and hairdressers and stuff like that. And there's a hairdresser that still sells products that you can buy in stores now. And I got introduced to him, and I used to cut my hair if I gave him some Coke, and it was all very exciting. And the dealer was very charismatic. He was sort of Grace Jones's London boyfriend, and she was a real wildcat and cokehead at the time, I think. Um, and 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 he lived in this sort of very cool warehouse that wasn't a squat, and he had all sorts of visitors to come and see him, like you know Malcolm McLaren, the Sex Pistols manager, and then when if David Bowie was shooting a video like Ashes to Ashes, there people turning up wearing the costumes from Ashes to Ashes video would turn up to buy Coke for the set for the video shoot and stuff, and then go back to the video shoot. So he's very connected, very charismatic, and it really captured my imagination. I kind of wanted to do what he was doing. So the Coke dealing seemed a exciting thing. So I had a go at doing it, and so I became a sort of a cocaine cowboy or a junior Coke hustler. And I wasn't very successful at it because my friends, weren't very wealthy. And after a while, my friends would say, "Look, can you stop trying to sell me Coke because I can't afford it?" And it didn't work. But it was still a good time. There was this vibe that the Russians between Russia and America, there was this sort of Cold War going on. The bomb might drop, so riding around in a taxi in London, off your head on Coke, uh, seemed very exciting. And I remember, you know, being a taxi junkie as well, getting taxis everywhere, and I was too fast to go on the bus or something. I was too slow, and I'd look out the taxi and I'd see some lady in her 70s or 80s and stuff, like creeping along with her shopping in a little granny shopping trolley that she'd take to the supermarket and stuff. She'd be walking slowly, and I'd think, oh man, how could you live like that? I just see people living a normal life and thinking this is fucking boring. I'm the Flash, I'm fucking zipping through life and everything like that. And so um, along the way, I would I ended up helping to score some coke for some people doing freebase, and that was like a precursor to crack. And you need a lot of money to do it. It was very expensive, and I remember going around to this house, and there was this I'd gotten them some, and they're all quite rich. And I remember them, once I brought some round for them, I remember them waking up this Persian girl, woman, and she was just in a nightdress and sort of hardly woken up. Her face was all puffy, and she went straight to the freebase pipe. It's like fucking hell. And I tried it myself, and I didn't know whether to laugh, shit, start masturbating, kill myself, or whatever. It's just this fucking mad, overpowering feeling in my. I think Chris was talking about bell ringing from injecting coke. Well, my hearing went completely metallic. Everyone sounded like fucking robots, and I remember them sending me out to get some supplies. They needed ammonia to freebase it or whatever. So I had to go to the pharmacy and buy some ammonia. And I could hardly fucking walk. It's like be in the world. Anyway, that was super powerful. And luckily, I couldn't afford it and I didn't like it that much. So thank God I didn't get into that. But the guy that ran that little freebase den, he got arrested, of course. And some of the checks that I'd middleman some deals, and some of the names on the written on the checks that were written for some of this stuff said like His Imperial Highness and stuff like that. So these were Persian princesses and stuff like that that were fucking, using daddy's checks or whatever. At one point, when I was living at home, I think one of them turned up in a Rolls Royce, and my dad really didn't fucking like that. He was not impressed. He didn't think that was cool that I was having any dealings with folks in Rolls Royces. He thought that was kind of shady. Um, and yeah, I was just sort of zipping around, too fast to live, too young to die. I remember I went out. I thought like I'll get a red jumpsuit, that'll be great. And then I was scrapped. The clothes, the stores were just closing. It was about 6 o'clock or whatever, and the stores were all closing. I thought I got to get some red shoes to go with my red jumpsuit. So I bought some crappy, shitty red shoes to go with the red jumpsuit, and that's the sort of thing cocaine can do to you. I looked like a complete wanker. But anyway, I thought it was a good idea at the time. Also had I needed a connection, and someone put me in touch with this gangster, and he was from what was called a London firm, which means like a London mafia, whatever, London corporation of crime, and he fronted me some, like, I don't know, quarter ounce or something of coke, and like $700 worth or $800 worth, on the understanding that if I didn't pay him back, I'd have my legs broken or whatever. So anyway, I phoned him back a couple of days later, and about paying him back and stuff like that. And someone answers the phone and said, with this sort of Cockney voice, saying, "Oh, did you know him? Oh, were you a very good friend of his?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm very sorry, but to tell you, but he's died." And I thought, "Oh, that's fucking great." So that was me off the hook. So I thought that was cool at the time. And basically, this is just total cokehead. I would say to people that I could detect the sound of someone chopping coke through a bank safe door, or 4 foot of lead lined, room. I could still hear people chopping coke because I'd want some. And I also I also, with Coke, I felt that it would chase any colds and flus away. And I sort of honestly believed it was better than vitamin C for you. So I thought it had a sort of, as the modern day thinking would be like ginger or something like that, take fresh ginger, that cocaine was good for you and would ward away illness. And I never got ill. So, and I also, with Coke, I also mistakenly believed that everyone that was successful and rich did Coke. So if you had a Ferrari, you were a Coke snorter. If you had a Rolls Royce, you were a Coke snorter. If you were a successful businessman, you were a Coke snorter. All this stuff, which of course is total bullshit. But I kind of believed it. Um, so at one point, um, in the early 80s, yeah, well, 1980-ish, a neighbor said, "Oh, there's a party on Saturday. Why don't you go to this? I can't go, but you can go." So I went to the party, and I think I tried to sell some coke at the party, and there was an older dude there, and he wanted me to give him some for free, and I wouldn't, and so he sort of got me by the scruff of the neck and was gonna beat me up or something, and then you know it's at moments like that when I encountered the sort of, I'm a skinny middle class kid, I'm not a street thug, and some elements to this coke dealing thing aren't going very well. But anyway, I didn't get a punch in the face, and a bit of drama at the party, but nothing happened. So anyway, a week later, this neighbor turns up and said, "Oh, the person who had that party wants to know if you could sell a lot of coke." And I was like, "Oh, um, what do you mean?" And she said, like ounces of it." And I was like, immediately thought, absolutely not. But my mouth said yes. And so um, it turns out that the it was a really freaky coincidence. The person that had the party was sort of friendly with a lawyer that lived upstairs. And the lawyer that lived upstairs had been in South America, wasn't into drugs much, but on a whim imported a kilo of cocaine because he figured that that he might be able to sell it for more money in the UK. But with one problem, he didn't know anybody that did coke in the UK. But what he did know was the guy downstairs whose party I went to, and therefore the guy downstairs at the party, I was the only person he knew that had ever had anything to do with coke, and so consequently we got connected. And um, and that was a very interesting summer of 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 selling a couple of kilos in ounces to about 3 people. Um, and with that, I have to pause for a second while I go to the bathroom, and I will be back. So, yeah, so my mentor, the guy that was selling it around town earlier, that I sort of um, was so impressed by, um, I learned from him that the way to cut coke was with something called Manite, which is Italian baby laxative. And it just so happened that a year before, or even 2 years before, I've been on holiday in Italy, and I had an Italian girlfriend, and one summer, and I went to 3 different pharmacies, and I bought up a load of it. And so I basically had like a shopping bag full of this stuff. They must have thought I was weird at the pharmacies that this person walks out with 10 packs of baby laxative, and then I went to another pharmacy, got another 10 packs. Anyway, I had this in store, and that came in very handy for this phase. Um, we ended up selling it to these 2 super upper class kids who sold it to sort of very, very rich Arabs that were probably freebasing or whatever. And so that was it. I didn't like to have it at the house. And one night when I did have it at the house overnight, I was totally paranoid. So I had a couple of ounces under my pillow, and I was listening to police radio, and as you do, thinking that I could make it to the toilet in time if I heard them smashing my door down and flush it all. But so on the police radio, I heard them announce an address 6 miles away across town on the other side of the river. And I recognized it as my friends, and it said that there was a fire there. So I thought, oh, this is crazy. So I phoned my friend, and he picked up the phone, and there's this sort of loud music because he was up late, about 2 a.m. And he said, "Oh, hi, how's it going?" He says, "What's up?" And I said, I think if you look out your front door, you'll find you're on fire." And he said, "Oh, wow." And he put the phone down, clunk, 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 opened the front door. And then I heard this shrieking of laughter. And he came back and he says, "You're right." So I told him he was on fire from 6 miles away because I was um, paranoid with 2 ounces of coke under my pillow. So that was funny. And let's have a look. I got ripped off for some of it by a sort of tough guy because I'm not tough. And then there was a very big deal, which was like this, the bag of it was like the size of a softball. And I went to the place, and when it was sort of middleman by some other people, and there was um, there was a guy standing over us with his hand inside a sort of airline bag, and I asked him what's in the bag, and he said a sawn-off shotgun. So he was, I didn't want to question whether he had one in there or not, but he could have done. And but the guy that the guy that was there in middle, the guy that was the purchaser was a famous songwriter that I recognized from my clubbing days, and he's dead now. He wrote Mandy for Barry Manilow, um, and which is originally called Brandy, but was renamed Mandy for Barry Manilow. So that was a big sort of middle of the road FM, hit back in the day. And he sort of winked at me because we weren't supposed to know each other, but he sort of winked at me. So that was interesting. And he'll turn up later in my story. And, we were handed like, I don't know, whatever it was, £6,000 or whatever it was. And, I suddenly realized I don't know what £6,000 looks like or how to count it or whatever. So complete amateurs at the whole thing. And then the supply ran out. The smugglers' supply finished, and I realized that you can't find smugglers in the phone book, and so that was the end of that little chapter, which was kind of fun. I didn't really make a lot of money. Was just doing it for a bit of cash and getting high on the supply, and wasn't super smart, but anyway, that was quite a lot. So a friend of mine worked at a recording studio, so I followed him into the job and went down there. I thought I'd maybe sell some coke there and stuff, and then I got very excited about the studio. It's a very exciting atmosphere. There was actually 3 studios in one building, 3 different recording rooms, and I thought it was super cool. So I decided that I was going to be a recording engineer, and so I begged the studio owner and I begged the studio manager. Both of them were junkies. With heroin for a job, and it finally gave me a try as an intern. You have to be a gopher and a runner and get sandwiches and shopping and stuff like that, and clean the studio. That's the first entry point for being a recording engineer back then. And on the first day, the junkie owner said, get a bucket of water, soapy water and a sponge, and come back here. And so I got it. And so I've got the water and the sponge. And he looked at me and he said, go wash my car. And I had a sort of crossroads in my life. I nearly tipped the bucket of water over and told him to go fuck himself or wash the car. And so I decided to wash the car. And I ended up cleaning the toilets, getting beers, getting the sandwich orders right, and all this sort of thing. And I worked my way up from being an assistant to an engineer to an in-house engineer. And I mean, in the first day that I was there, Adam and the Ants were recording their big album down there. So that was really weird to hear that, coming through the doors. Blur recorded there. Marianne Faithfull recorded there. The Smiths recorded there. Lots of bands recorded there. So yeah. So the owner was kind of at one point came in and said that he thought he heard police, and he came in and put a giant wrap about the size of an envelope on the mixing console and said, can you look after that? And we're all on the session just thought, what the hell? And he left, and then we all looked in it, and it was the biggest amount of brown powder I've ever seen. So that was heroin. And what do you mean look after it? And he was convinced that police were hiding under this 2-inch space underneath an elevator shaft. And so he had sort of cocaine psychosis or whatever. So he was imagining miniature policemen. And so that was pretty crazy. And then and then in the 80s, I'd go on trips to New York and go clubbing, and no one went to the men's toilets. The ladies was more fun, and in a lot of the toilets there was a room before the ladies' toilets, which was just for people doing coke. So that was crazy. And there's a club called Save the Robots where I was in there and someone said, should we get some coke? And I was like, well, I don't have any money. And they said, well, it's $20 a go. And I was like, what? Because in England, it was like, you'd have to pay like $100 to get some, but $20, I thought, fucking love this town. So that was good. I liked going clubbing. I moved to music business kind of collapsed during a recession. I moved to Berlin, and one of the first people I met was a barman that was very popular, and me and him became buddies. And he just worked in a bar, and all his friends got he'd have 6 pals there, and each of them would get about 8 beers. So that was free beer in Berlin for a couple of years. So that was drinking going on. Let's see. at one point in Berlin, there was no there wasn't any coke, and I met these Italian guys, which I thought might be sort of like mafia type dudes, and I thought they might be able to get some coke. So I told them about this club that I was I was running a club night, and they came down, and later the club owner said to me, "Who the fuck were those guys?" And you know, they wanted to take over the club, so that's you know, don't hang out with the mafia, basically. So that was a bit of a dumb thing. So I was in Berlin for a couple of years, and then I recorded a song that was a bit of a hit back in the UK. So I came back to the UK to get back into the music business. But there I started to still going out, but now instead of dealing it and getting it for free, I was starting to pay for coke and booze, and then I started to get I got into a phase of having two hangovers a week, and the hangovers were like 2-day hangovers. So that's like a lot of time knocked out. I didn't have the money. I'd wake up and I'd look in my pocket and think, oh, I hope I've got, 20 pounds left. And look in my pocket and it was just fucking £5. It's like, oh shit, I'd spent too much money and stuff. And I was doing this recording session where I was getting paid cash every day, and I was going out and blowing it on booze and coke. And I was on the subway, and I picked up, it's before mobile phones, and I was bored on the subway. It was a long trip, and I picked up a newspaper which happened to be the Financial Times, and there was an article in it that was about coke use in the city, meaning the financial district of London. And it was an interview with someone from Cocaine Anonymous, and there was a chat about how these financial money market traders a lot of them are doing coke and getting fucked up by it. And the guy from Cocaine Anonymous said that sometimes we find that coke users feel don't want to sit in a room with sort of heroin addicts or alcoholics, that they feel like a cut above the heroin addict or alcoholic. They feel snobby and aloof and stuff. And I recognized myself in that. I thought, yeah, that's right. We're the jet setters. We're not asleep in the corner, or we haven't pissed our pants in a subway or something. We're the rock stars. And I recognized myself in that sort of elitist type thing. And coke was really bugging me. The booze was bugging me. And so at 3 a.m., I dialed the CA number. And I dialed it once. The guy picked it up, and then I was nervous and hung up. And I did that 3 times in a row until finally, the guy picked up the 4th time, and he said, "Hello?" And I spoke to him and said, "Well, come down to a meeting." And so I went to a meeting, and the first meeting, there was the guy that had bought the songwriter that had bought this sort of softball-sized deal. And he was sat, in one of the chairs in the meeting. I thought, fuck me, there's the famous songwriters in here, my old customer. And then there was the woman doing the chair, said she was in her 30s, but she looked about 60. And she was telling a story about how she tore up her kitchen floor looking for a chip of crack. And I was like, fucking hell. And there was a kid there that was, there was a Cockney kid there that was convinced that he's being followed by helicopters, like out of Goodfellas. And he might have been, but I kind of, I don't know, I kind of seen enough. I thought, you know what? Fuck this. I think I'll try and quit. And so I thought we'd all go to the pub afterwards and have a drink and talk about how much coke we'd snorted or sold, or, the time I went to a deal with a switchblade taped to my leg, or, anecdotes and stuff like that. And the songwriter looked at me and said, no booze. And it was a Beavis and Butthead moment. I said no booze, and he said no booze, and I think I said no booze, and this went back and forth while I, finally ka-chunk, the penny dropped, and I understood. And so we went to a cafe where everyone smoked like 1,000 Marlboro Lights and drank espressos, and basically. That was 27 years ago. And my sobriety started in the street outside that meeting when the guy said no booze. And it's been unbroken to this day. Just a side note, because I know I've been going on a bit, is that via my son, my son got diagnosed with ADHD, and then I realized that, hang on a second, my answers are all in the fucking left-hand column as well. So I've got, diagnosed with adult ADHD. I tried Ritalin stimulants for 6 days, and I knew I wanted my sweaty hands on those magic tablets because I'd heard so much about them. But I recognized that I just felt like a 19-year-old with a wrap of speed in my jeans pocket, and that they didn't suit me. So I phoned up the shrink, and my partner said, "You got to quit those fucking tablets. You're fucking talking really fast, and it's really changed you." So I flushed them down the toilet, and here I am. So. Thanks for listening. I love Dopey Nation, and I like to move it from being a coke dealer to a hope dealer.